Okay, now we have a couple of stories of encounters that Jesus, confrontations really, that Jesus had with the Pharisees, the authorities, over the Sabbath. The Pharisees, by the way, were kind of a made-up religious party. They came into shape during the crisis of the 2nd century BC, the 100s BC. We talked about this before. We read the book of Daniel, and we talked about it kind of in the beginning of our New Testament survey. There was a period of time in the 160s BC when they were under heavy oppression from the king of Syria, a dude named Antiochus Epiphanes, who wanted to Hellenize the Jews and make them all into Greeks, basically. And they fought him off, and he desecrated the temple. He set up an altar to Zeus in there. And they fought him off. And then for about 100 years, they had their own independence again for a while. And it was during this time when this group of people came together, and that's what the Pharisees were. They were not actually priests. They were lay people. The priestly class was connected to a group called the Sadducees. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees were two different parties. They were basically like two different political parties. And the Sadducees were the priestly class. Some priests may have also been Pharisees. But the Pharisees, by and large, were laymen who took it upon themselves, essentially, to be the religious authorities in Israel. In the aftermath of the Hellenization efforts in the 100s BC, the efforts by Antiochus Epiphanes and other rulers to make the Jews like Greeks. And the Pharisees resisted that. They did not want to Hellenize. They did not want to become like Greeks. They did not want to become like the world around them. And that's where the Pharisees came from. And they were lay people. You did not have to be a priest to be a Pharisee. Paul was a Pharisee, and he was not a priest. He was not of the priestly tribe. The priestly tribe, the priests were associated with the Sadducees, which was another political party. And we'll read more about them later. So anyway, so these are basically the self-appointed religious enforcers in Israel. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. I don't know when this happens, I guess during his early Galilean ministry. Whenever you have these kinds of phrases like one Sabbath or on another time or some, like you have no idea when those things actually happen. If you put all the Gospels together and kind of see where they all treat these subjects, then you can kind of get an idea of approximately when these kinds of stories would have taken place. Okay? But when you see things like a few days later, or very early in the morning, or that evening after sunset, which we saw back in a page ago, then you have like more definite time markers, and then you can use those to kind of help string the events together. But when you see things like once again, or another time, or then he did this, or again Jesus said, or what, like who knows? I mean, who knows when those things happen? I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Mark himself probably wasn't there for this. He was not one of the apostles. He may have been part of that wider group of apostles or disciples, or at least his family may have been. He may have been too young, honestly. But even Peter, who is responsible for much of this material, he may not remember. By the time he tells Mark about this stuff and Mark writes it down, Peter himself may not have remembered the sequence of events. He may have remembered what happened and what Jesus said, but he may not remember the before and after. So one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what Jesus did?" Now, I don't know to what degree this act is actually unlawful on the Sabbath. I guess it depends on how much work they're actually doing. If they're picking the grain and grinding it up, maybe that's work. I don't think they probably are. It was legal for people to pick grain in other people's fields and eat it. You could not carry it in a basket. That'd be stealing. But you could, that's how they fed their poor. They were the field owners, the vineyard owners, of the field owners were prohibited from preventing people from eating from their fields, as long as those people weren't stealing. We read about this in the law, of course. In this case, we're going to go to Deuteronomy 23. At the very end of the chapter, in verse 24, if you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but do not put any in your basket. That'd be stealing. That'd be taking advantage of your neighbor. If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to his standing grain. And also there were laws that when the field owners sent the men out to harvest his fields, if anything dropped to the ground, they had to leave it there. They couldn't pick it up. And those were meant to be leftovers for the poor who didn't own their fields and didn't have any other sources of food. But Jesus does not argue with the Pharisees on the technicalities of whether or not what they're doing is work. Okay? Whether or not what they're doing constitutes work on the Sabbath. He's not arguing with them about that. I'm honestly not sure where the line is drawn here. And honestly, the Sabbath laws have always been kind of fuzzy in this regards. Jews to this day still have some difficulty determining what is actually work on the Sabbath and what isn't. And that was why the Pharisees had, they had come up with their entire body of extra teachings. They tried to put a hedge around, when they went into captivity and came back again at the end of the Old Testament, they had to shake their habit of idolatry, and they ended up doing that. They did end up doing that. Their experience in Babylon and afterwards did get them to stop bowing down to worshiping other idols and other nations' gods. That is true. But they had another problem that developed in the meantime, in that they made something of an idol out of the law. And these extra-religious parties like the Pharisees and these teachers of the law had built up their own code of traditions. At this point in time, these extra rules and traditions had still not been written down. That would happen later, when they actually come up with an entire extra body of written teachings. At this point in time, they're not written; they're just oral. But they had come up with their entire extra set of rules around the law as a sort of hedge or fence, just to make sure that no one got close to breaking the law. So to prevent anyone from getting close to breaking the law, they put all these extra rules in place, because they don't do that stuff. And that was meant to keep people from getting farther into sin and breaking the law. And all that was intended to encourage purity and discourage idolatry, to prevent a catastrophe like the Babylonian exile from happening again, and to get the Messiah to come, to bring about the coming of the Messiah. To prepare the people. That was their way of preparing the people for the arrival of the Messiah, and also to ensure that something like the Babylonian exile did not happen again. Unfortunately, their best efforts will end up causing these things to happen. The Messiah will come, they won't be ready for him, and they will get carried into captivity again, and they can't stop that either. So their best efforts end up not succeeding in either of these ways. But Jesus does not argue with them about whether or not it's what the disciples are doing is violating Sabbath law or not. That he does not get into the technicalities of whether or not that constitutes work. He says he gets to the heart of the matter. Instead of getting lost in the weeds about the technicalities of the issue, he gets to the heart of the matter here. So he answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need?" Well, let's read about that, shall we? We have read this. We read this back when we read through the account of 1 Samuel, which covered the time of David. But we're going to read it again now, just to make sure that we're up to date with what Jesus is going to say. 1 Samuel 21. Let's put this here. 1 Samuel 21, starting at the beginning of the chapter. He's running. He's running away from Saul. So he goes to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, and this is going to be a lie. He's actually on the run, but he's going to give him a cover story, which isn't true here. The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, no one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what you have on hand, give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. You know, women are nasty and impure. Don't want to touch them, huh? David replied, indeed, women have been kept from us. As usual, whenever I set out, they'd be a distraction. If you're on a military operation and you have to get ready for fighting and combat, you know, like, women are just a distraction. You don't want them around. You can come back to them when you're done. They'll be waiting for you at home when you get back. That's not helpful having them around when you're actually out in the field on a mission. The men's things are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. What is this bread of the presence? Well, we read about that in Leviticus 24. We're going to do this all throughout the Gospels, by the way. You know, the New Testament is built on top of the Old Testament. You can't understand the New Testament without knowing the Old Testament. You just can't. Jesus was thoroughly acquainted with the Old Testament. He had those scriptures memorized backwards and forwards. The apostles all did. The early Christians all did. Okay? So we're going to do that. When we go through the New Testament, we're going to go back to the Old Testament again, and read it like we're doing right now. So get used to this, because we're not going to stop doing this. Now, we might not keep doing it, okay, when we read the Gospels, when we read the same stories repeated in each Gospel, we might not keep reading the same Old Testament story connected with each Gospel, okay, but we're going to keep, whenever we read a new story that, for example, wasn't in one of the previous Gospels, like when we get to this account in Matthew or Luke, we won't go back and read the Old Testament scriptures, because we're doing it now. But when we read new stuff in Matthew and Luke that connects to the Old Testament, or John, that connects to the Old Testament, we're going to go back and look at that. So get used to it. This is what we're going to do. Leviticus 24, verse 5. Take fine flour and break 12 loaves of bread, using 2/10 of an ephah for each loaf. Set them in 2 rows, 6 in each row. That's be 12 total, of course. On the table of pure gold before the Lord. Along each row, put some pure incense as a memorial portion to represent the bread, and to be an offering made to the Lord by fire. This bread is to be set out before the Lord regularly, Sabbath after Sabbath, on behalf of the Israelites, as a lasting covenant. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, the priests, who are to eat it in a holy place, because it is the most holy part of their regular share of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. So only the priest could have that. Only Aaron and his sons. Only the priest could have that. It was not lawful for David to have that bread, but the priest at the time gave it to him anyway. So Jesus, in his confrontation with the Pharisees here, is not debating the technicalities of whether or not what the disciples are doing is technically work on the Sabbath. He's getting to the heart of the matter. Have you never read, he answered, what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, now that's not the guy we just read about, it's a guy named Ahimelech, so apparently Abiathar was considered, Jesus considers him to have been the high priest at the time. He entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which was lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. And he said to them, his critics, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man, Jesus, he's identifying himself as that, is Lord even of the Sabbath. Another time, He went into the synagogue. I don't know when this happened. I guess it was after this one. Or some other time, some other Sabbath. A man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they have turned on him. I don't know if they ever liked him. I don't know. I don't know if the Pharisees ever liked Jesus. We've seen them interacting with him right from the start. We'll read about in Luke that even John the Baptist went to go talk to the Pharisees, so they've been aware, certainly. But now they're looking for reasons to accuse him. Whether or not they ever liked him, now they don't, and they're looking for reasons to accuse him. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Now, I don't know of any rule saying you can't heal on the Sabbath, but they're gonna look, they're gonna watch. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And then Jesus asked him, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill?" They remained silent. There's no answer to that. You know that. Of course they have to say it's lawful to do good and to save life. But they don't want to. Because they want to accuse him. They want him to do something to heal this man's hand so they can accuse him for breaking the Sabbath. So they're not going to answer that question. Because if they were being honest, they'd have to say it's evil to do good. It's not lawful. It's not lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And they don't want to be saying that. They don't want to outright say that in front of people, so they just can't say anything. He looked around at them in anger. This is Jesus being angry now, actually. And deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. I'm guessing this was done in a way to make it impossible to accuse him of work. I don't know if this work. Is stitching out your hand work? So the Pharisees have no basis for a charge against Jesus here at all. But they went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. So they didn't take the lesson to heart. I mean, I guess they did. They just rejected it. They don't want to listen to this man. They don't want this man as their Messiah, their king. They want to kill him. And they even team up with the Herodians to do it. We don't know much about the Herodians. They were allied with Herod. Now, Herod today is not the same guy as Herod who was alive when Jesus was born. That guy was named Herod the Great, and he died when Jesus was very young, a baby, maybe a toddler, not really sure. He died when Jesus was very young, and his kingdom was split up into four, and the guy here who is called Herod is one of his sons. And there's going to be a couple other Herods even after him. But the Herodians were a group that was associated with Herod, and Herod was about Hellenization. Herod, no matter which Herod you're talking about, the Herod people, the Herodians, they were rulers over this region who were acting in concert with and on behalf of Rome. So they were Hellenizers. They sought to mingle with the wider world. They sought to make the Jews into Greeks, or to get the Jews to adopt pagan cultures and practices. The Pharisees didn't. I just got done talking. The Pharisees wanted to keep the Jewish lifestyle intact and resist the pressure to adopt the ways of the world. And the Herodians were all about adopting the ways of the world and getting along with the authorities, the Roman authorities before, and then the pagan authorities. And so there was a natural conflict there. But they both hate Jesus, because Jesus is a threat to them both. If Jesus is the king of the Jews, he's a threat to both the Herodians and the Pharisees. If he's the Son of Man, he's a threat to Caesar. If he's the Son of God, he's a threat to every earthly ruling authority. So they can be united in their hatred of Jesus, although normally they would be at each other's throats.